Jennie Jerome Churchill's life was a tempest of scandal, ambition, and audacious defiance. She shattered New York society by marrying into one of England's most powerful families, sparring with duchesses and stealing the heart of a future king. She weathered the public disgrace of her husband's downfall, the whispers of infidelity, and the shockwaves of marrying not one but two men, decades her junior. But Jennie was far more than the sum of her scandals. She braved wartime hospital ships, championed causes with courage, penned plays laced with her own struggles, and soared into the skies in her 60s. Most enduringly, she nurtured the genius of Winston Churchill, her unshakable faith lifting him through the shadows of failure into the light of greatness. From the glittering ballrooms of New York to the hallowed halls of Blenheim, from private heartbreak to public triumph, Jennie's story is one of resilience, reinvention, and relentless determination. She defied convention, she shattered expectations, and she left an indelible mark on history. This is a tale of love and loss, of daring and devotion, and the unstoppable spirit of a woman who changed the world. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe. We now have over 70 biographies on the channel, with new content every week. And now, let's uncover the scandalous and extraordinary life of Jennie Jerome Churchill. On January 9th, 1854, in Brooklyn, New York, Jennie Jerome entered the world, the second of four daughters in a family marked by both privilege and secrecy. Her father, Leonard Jerome, inspired by his admiration for the opera singer Jenny Lind, chose Jennie's name, a detail that sparked her mother Clara's exclamation, "What? Just plain Jennie?" Clara, having inherited a substantial fortune after losing both parents at the tender age of 2, bore a lineage mingled with revolutionary heroism, where both her grandfathers had fought in the Revolution and rumored Native American ancestry, a heritage deemed unspeakable in their circles, but something Winston would grow quite proud of in his later years. Leonard Jerome, a charismatic figure, navigated through fluctuating fortunes with the ease of a seasoned speculator, his life punctuated by both splendid gains and staggering losses. Beyond his financial escapades, his scandalous love affairs added layers of distress to Clara's life, further isolating her within their social stratum. The Jerome family grew with the addition of two more daughters, Leonie and Camille. However, their lives were shadowed by tragedy when young Camille succumbed to a fever at the age of 7, a loss that deeply scarred the family fabric. Jennie Jerome's childhood sparkled with the grandeur of her father, Leonard's most affluent years. Together, they would charge through the park in his four-in-hand carriage, their speed eliciting shouts from startled pedestrians. Their social calendar brimmed with visits to the theater and summers in Newport, while Jennie enjoyed horseback rides on her own pony in front of their 6-story Manhattan mansion. This palatial home boasted a 3-story stable and was the venue for Leonard's lavish balls, where fountains sprayed cologne and champagne, epitomizing the excess of their lifestyle. Leonard, a speculator and part owner of the New York Times, capitalized on insider information during the Civil War, supporting Union causes generously. However, once peace was restored, his contributions shifted towards aiding the South's reconstruction. His numerous romantic affairs and the rumors of illegitimate children strained his marriage with Clara, exacerbating her exclusion from New York's elite Astor 400. This rejection, coupled with her own unfulfilled marital life, prompted Clara to redirect her focus towards Europe, a place she deemed more suitable for her daughters to secure aristocratic marriages. 4 years following the death of her youngest daughter, Clara, determined and hopeful, relocated to Paris with her daughters. At this juncture, Leonard's fortunes were faltering amidst whispers of scandalous investments. He concurred that their departure was prudent, promising to visit whenever possible. To maintain social grace, Clara attributed their move to health reasons, claiming the European air would be beneficial, and there was never any mention of divorce, for even its whisper could harm her daughter's prospects. In 1867, as Jennie Jerome neared her 13th birthday, her family arrived in Paris during the zenith of the Second Empire. The Jerome family quickly found favor within the city's elite circles. Empress Eugénie, charmed by her own American grandfather's heritage, was particularly taken with the spirited Americans. Clara and her eldest daughter, Clarita, were soon fixtures at court, embraced by the regal ambiance of their new environs. Jennie, meanwhile, flourished academically and artistically at a prestigious Parisian school, mastering the piano to such an extent that she was invited to perform at a salon hosted by Princess Matilda. However, it was Princess Pauline Metternich who left an indelible mark on young Jennie. Known for her sharp wit, vibrant persona, and impeccable fashion sense, Metternich was a celebrated muse for the era's foremost writers and musicians, and a fervent patron of the arts. Jennie, captivated by Metternich's distinctive style and the revolutionary designs of her dressmaker Charles Worth, who was reshaping European haute couture, became a devoted client. Yet, the resplendent world of balls and soirees came to an abrupt halt in 1870 as Prussian forces advanced on France. The French suffered a series of devastating defeats, leading to the capture of the emperor and a swift, bloodless revolution that saw the fall of Napoleon III. Paris, besieged and beleaguered, endured until January 1871 amidst a harrowing famine. With their belongings in hand and others pushed in a wheelbarrow, the Jeromes managed to secure passage on the last train from Paris, eventually finding refuge on a vessel bound for England. They landed in Brighton and made their way to London. Jennie found the gloom and fog of London depressing and pined for Paris. They spent summers on the Isle of Wight in the village of Cowes, next to the exiled Princess Eugenie, with whom the family often took walks. Queen Victoria often stayed on the Isle of Wight in the summer, and the Jerome girls were invited to all the smartest parties. On August 12, 1873, Jennie and Lord Randolph Churchill's paths crossed at an elegant ball. Randolph, the 23-year-old second son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough, was instantly smitten with 19-year-old Jennie after just one dance. His affection was swiftly reciprocated. Randolph, known for his charm and charismatic presence, was initially in Cowes for leisure, indulging his love for hounds and hunting. Yet, upon encountering Jennie, he sought a formal introduction, captivated by her vibrant spirit and intellect. Unlike his more fragile sisters, Jennie was robust, well-read, an accomplished horsewoman, and possessed a maturity that belied her years. Her lively mind and spirited conversation led Randolph to perceive her as a woman of exceptional depth and wisdom. Jennie, in turn, was drawn to Randolph's originality and the refreshing novelty of his ideas. Enamored, she suggested inviting him to dinner the following evening. During that intimate gathering, their connection deepened, and by the end of the night, Randolph confided to a friend his resolve to marry her. The following evening, after another dinner, the couple strolled through the orchard where Randolph proposed, and Jennie joyfully accepted. Although Randolph had to depart Cowes for business commitments, the couple exchanged heartfelt promises and tokens of their love. Upon his departure, Jennie revealed their engagement to her mother, who expressed dismay, possibly concerned by the rapid progression of their courtship or the precedence of Jennie's engagement over her older sister. Undeterred, Jennie reassured Randolph in her correspondence that her mother's approval would eventually be won over, adding a tender postscript that playfully admonished him not to smoke excessively. Randolph grappled with familial challenges, particularly with his father, John Winston Spencer Churchill, the 7th Duke of Marlborough, a staunch Victorian who deemed the Jeromes mere adventurers beneath their station. He disparaged Leonard as a vulgar kind of man and not respectable. However, compelled by his family's frequent financial straits, he reluctantly agreed to the match, only for Leonard to withdraw his consent when the Churchills wanted all the money to go to Randolph. This sparked a prolonged exchange of bitter correspondence between the two families, embroiling Randolph and Jennie in a saga of negotiations that would last for years. Throughout this period, Randolph and Jennie sustained their bond through secret meetings and a stream of fervent letters. During one memorable visit to Cowes, Randolph introduced Jennie to the Prince of Wales, who commended his choice. However, by September, the Jeromes returned to Paris, initiating a phase of intense, often reproachful letter writing, with Jennie leading a reclusive life. By the following October, Randolph crossed the Channel, meeting Jennie clandestinely, and they had their first kiss. As gossip about their engagement spread, Randolph's father pressured him to stand for MP in Woodstock, a position he had once held. Though hesitant, Randolph was persuaded by Jennie's encouragement about his potential as a reformative speaker. He won the seat easily, though it provided no salary, further straining their financial situation. After his electoral victory, Randolph hastened to Paris. Amid ongoing parental negotiations, it is speculated that during this visit, Jennie and Randolph decisively acted, resulting in Jennie's pregnancy. This is substantiated by the timing of Winston's birth exactly 9 months later. Despite persistent financial wrangling by both families, the wedding plans proceeded. They eventually settled on a dowry of £50,000, with half going directly to Jennie and the remainder to Randolph. On April 15, 1874, in a dual ceremony at the British Embassy in Paris, an Anglican service followed by an American one, Jennie and Randolph were married. Leonard proudly attended his favorite daughter's wedding, though the Marlboroughs were notably absent. Following their nuptials, Jennie and Randolph Churchill journeyed back to the heart of England, to the majestic Blenheim Castle. This architectural marvel, bestowed upon John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, by Queen Anne in 1705, was a token of gratitude for his valor in battle. Designed to rival the grandeur of Versailles, the palace was a tangible echo of regal and martial glory. As Jennie first laid eyes on the vast landscapes and the stately structure, she was enveloped in awe. The beauty of Blenheim was overwhelming, its grandiosity stirring a deep admiration within her. An emotion so profound, yet her steadfast American pride whispered to keep such awe unspoken to her father. The daily life at Blenheim was a tapestry of antiquated rituals and formalities, each day unfolding like a carefully choreographed ballet. Mornings were dedicated to the quiet contemplation of newspapers, an intellectual prelude to the evening's political discourse. The afternoons offered genteel excursions, a carriage ride to a neighbor's estate, or a leisurely stroll through the meticulously manicured gardens. Each moment designed to gracefully bridge the hours. Evenings at the palace were a portrait of Victorian formality. Following stately dinners, they would retreat to the Van Dyke room for intellectual pursuits or cards by candlelight. Occasionally, a surreptitious hand would nudge the clock forward, a silent concession to the collective fatigue, yet no one would dare suggest an early night before the appointed hour. At precisely 11, the proposal for bed was made, and the family would ascend to their chambers, candlestick in hand, only to rise and repeat the cycle anew. Tea time, too, was an affair of elaborate courtesies, followed by an enforced rest where she would have to retire to her chamber and wait for supper. She found her in-laws cold and unwelcoming, and the forced formality and endless repetition stifled her. In May, the couple moved to London for the season, and Jennie captivated high society at dinners and balls. It was a whirl of excitement, she said, and all of London wanted to meet the young American. However, the season itself had to be cut short, as Jennie began to experience morning sickness and her pregnancy began to show. Her confinement was planned for mid-September, which suggests the Marlboroughs must have had some inkling that the child had been conceived prior to April. As if the child had been conceived on the day of their wedding, the due date would have been in January, and confinement would have begun in November. In addition, a child born 2 months premature would have had a very low survival rate and likely been underdeveloped. Yet Winston was born healthy and strong on Monday, November 30th, 1874, at 1:30 a.m. In the morning, the bells of Woodstock tolled for his arrival. Jennie did not nurse her son, as duties were handed over to a wet nurse, and she would flitter in and out of her young boy's life for the next 15 years. Whatever thaw her relationship had with the Duchess when Winston was born soon cooled again after Randolph's older brother George gave her a ring that was actually his wife's. Jennie had no idea it had belonged to her, and it is likely George, who is called Blandford, was simply trying to make mischief. Though the event escalated into a squabble between the two brothers, the Duchess placed most of the blame on Jennie. "I had wished to be more of a mother-in-law to you," she chided. "Perhaps I was wrong." She always thought Jennie of low morals, perhaps because she was American, or perhaps the premature birth, but Randolph had always been her favorite, and the biggest reason she resented Jennie was that she had displaced her in her son's affections. Though soon, the family squabble would give way to a much larger one that involved the prince himself and was felt for years to come. In October 1875, the Prince of Wales embarked on a grand tour of India with Lord Aylesford among the dignitaries. Meanwhile, Aylesford's wife, Edith, engaged in an open affair with Jennie's brother-in-law, Blandford. As Aylesford journeyed through India, Blandford openly cohabitated near Edith's residence. When the scandal erupted, alarming cables greeted the royal party at each port. In Nepal, the Prince of Wales infamously denounced George as the greatest blackguard alive. By early 1876, Blandford and Lady Aylesford eloped, compelling Blandford to seek a legal separation. Lady Aylesford, having left behind 3 children, appealed to her mother-in-law for their care. Previously, the prince himself had been romantically involved with Lady Aylesford. In a twist, after the prince's disparaging remarks, she disclosed his love letters to Blandford, who then showed them to Randolph. Driven by a misguided sense of loyalty, Randolph took the letters to Princess Alexandra, threatening their disclosure in court. The prince, incensed by this breach, challenged Randolph to a duel. Randolph dismissed the challenge as cowardly and offered an apology to Princess Alexandra, but the reputational damage was irreversible. The prince vowed to shun the Churchills and avoid any London residence they frequented. Lord Aylesford was strongly advised against divorce and subsequently relocated to Texas, where he embraced a life of farming and drinking, dying in 1885 at the age of 35. Blandford and Lady Aylesford had a son in 1881, but never married. Throughout these tribulations, the Duke maintained a stoic silence. To mitigate the fallout, he accepted the role of Viceroy of Ireland, appointing Randolph as his private secretary. This appointment led Jennie, Winston, and the Duchess to relocate to Ireland, marking a necessary retreat from the scandal that had enveloped their lives. In the lush landscapes of Ireland, Jennie Jerome found herself in a gilded yet confining cage. Overseen by the watchful Duchess, she felt her freedom diminish. Meanwhile, Randolph, battling severe bouts of illness, believed by historians to be syphilis, spent much of his time away, seeking treatments in London or France, or retreating to the remote fishing rivers of Norway. His letters, filled with affection yet devoid of intimacy, hinted at a marriage transforming into more of a cordial companionship. The origin of Randolph's illness remains veiled in controversy. Some suggest a reckless encounter at university, others a more mundane liaison with a housemaid. His increasing absences, marked by missed birthdays and anniversaries, signaled a shift in their relationship, steering it towards a platonic partnership rooted in mutual respect, rather than romantic love. Jennie, always a romantic, felt lonely and isolated. She immersed herself in the arts, singing, painting, piano, and horse riding filling her days. It was during this time, around 1880, that her life began to intertwine with Star Falmouth, later the 7th Viscount Falmouth, a charismatic military man who shared her love for hunting and racing. Known in her letters as a frequent visitor, his presence sparked rumors that he might be more than just a friend. Her letters speak playfully of their interactions, and he would often visit in late afternoons when the servants were away. Amidst these swirling rumors, Jennie gave birth to her second son, John Strange Spencer Churchill, on February 4, 1880. While her sisters whispered about John's paternity, the reality remained shrouded in discretion. Regardless of the paternal mystery, Winston always loved his younger brother, whereas Randolph treated him exactly as he did Winston, with complete indifference. The general election of 1880 brought a shift in leadership and marked the end of the family's tenure in Ireland, heralding a seismic change in Jennie's life. Returning to England, Randolph retained his seat as MP for Woodstock, immersing himself in the fervor of politics. Meanwhile, Jennie found herself suffocating under the critical gaze of the Duchess of Marlborough at Blenheim Palace. The Duchess's disapproval was relentless, and Jennie's frustration spilled into a letter to her mother. "I quite forget what it is like to be with people who love me. The fact is, I loathe being here. It is gall and wormwood to me to accept everything or argue. I hate it. The Duchess hates me, perhaps because I am a little prettier and more attractive than her daughters. Everything I do or say or wear is found fault with. This was no ordinary domestic discomfort, but a battle of wills between two formidable women, with Jennie trapped in the gilded cage of Blenheim. Her salvation came from her father, Leonard, who purchased a house for the family in London. This move opened a new chapter in Jennie's life, one that would bind her ever more deeply to the political world her husband so ardently pursued. In London, Jennie emerged as the architect of their social strategy. She wrote frequently to her father, pleading for additional funds, assuring him the expenses were necessary for the grand political gatherings she and Randolph hosted, a truth that masked her equal devotion to her dazzling wardrobe. Adorned in exquisite creation, Jennie became the toast of London society. Her sartorial elegance was not mere vanity. It was a calculated effort to elevate her husband's standing. She understood instinctively that her image was as critical to their success as Randolph's rhetoric, and her charm turned every social gathering into a political advantage. Still excluded from the Prince of Wales's elite circle, Jennie redirected her energy into politics, a passion rare for women of her time. She did not settle for the role of a silent observer. Instead, she became a commanding presence, engaging in conversations that bolstered Randolph's stature. Her theatrical flair proved invaluable to her husband, whose nerves often faltered during speeches. At a time when women were expected to merely listen, Jennie's intellect and charisma defied convention, transforming her into one of London's most captivating and influential political hostesses. Politics became Jennie's stage, and she performed with unmatched brilliance. Her connections and influence during these years not only advanced Randolph's career, but laid the groundwork for the future. The relationships she cultivated would later prove invaluable to her son Winston, aiding his rise to prominence. In fostering Randolph's ambitions, Jennie was quietly shaping the destiny of one of Britain's greatest leaders. Their home at Connaught Place became a political hub, a rendezvous for figures of all affiliations. Randolph's burgeoning reputation, paired with Jennie's irresistible charm, drew an eclectic array of individuals into their orbit. Yet, beneath the surface of their social success lay a domestic strain, Randolph's recurrent ill health. From February to October 1882, his condition worsened, leaving him bedridden for 7 months. Jennie took on the role of nurse with unyielding devotion, though Randolph's temperament grew increasingly erratic. His moods shifted unpredictably, oscillating between bursts of frustration and soaring ambition. Through it all, Jennie's steadfast support and gentle persuasion convinced him of his potential for greatness. Jennie accompanied Randolph on his political engagements, acting as both confidant and strategist. She presented flowers at schools, hospitals, and nursing homes, charmed local gossip circles, and sought to sway influential women who could, in turn, influence their husbands. Meanwhile, their home became a marvel of modernity, being the first private residence in London to feature electric lighting. The innovation was such a novelty that visitors flocked to inspect the house, marveling at the cutting-edge technology. In December 1882, Jennie faced a serious illness herself, but after recovering, she made an effort to spend more time with her sons. She took Winston and Jack on walks, shared lessons with Winston, brought him to pantomimes, and even took him on day trips. Despite these moments, Jennie's maternal care has often been criticized, though much of the blame likely rests with the Duchess of Marlborough, who insisted that Winston be raised by a governess and nanny under her watchful supervision, believing Jennie was of a fast set and wanting to minimize her influence on the two boys. Winston, soon sent away to school, fell into the hands of H.W. Sneed Kinnersley, a notorious disciplinarian whose brutal methods left a lasting mark on the boy. Frequently flogged to exhaustion, Winston became deeply depressed, struggling academically and sending home heart-wrenching letters that concealed the full extent of his suffering, but pleaded for a visit. During these years, Jennie's personal life was equally complex. Her affair with Star Falmouth continued, and she frequently spent time with her close friend, Lady Blanche Hosier, the mother of Clementine Churchill. Lady Blanche's scandalous reputation for numerous lovers fed persistent rumors that Clementine's father was not Henry Montague Hosier, but William George Middleton, a notorious rake. Middleton, known for his penchant for clandestine affairs, was also a guest of Jennie's, and whispers of their romantic involvement swirled. Middleton's liaisons extended beyond English high society. He was a close companion of Empress Elizabeth of Austria, famously known as Sisi, and their rumored affair reportedly caused a significant rift between Sisi and her son, Crown Prince Rudolph. For those intrigued by this scandal, be sure to explore our video on Elizabeth of Austria, which delves into this fascinating connection. Meanwhile, Randolph's political star continued to rise. Reflecting on this period, young Winston later wrote, "His hour had come, as his father began to be touted as a potential leader of the Tory party." By 1883, Jennie's life had taken on a frenetic pace, as she became a pivotal force in the creation of the Primrose League, an ambitious initiative aimed at spreading conservative ideals across the nation. Tireless in her efforts, she hosted recitals, orchestrated concerts, and staged elegant garden parties, all designed to draw supporters not only to the League, but to her husband's political aspirations. Jennie's magnetism and flair turned these events into triumphs, her charm enticing even the most reticent attendees into the conservative fold. But behind her polished exterior, Jennie's heart found itself ensnared in the web of a new, intoxicating passion. That same year, she began an affair with Count Charles Kinsky, an Austrian aristocrat renowned for his linguistic prowess, equestrian expertise, and a charisma that could light up any room. Kinsky's refined elegance extended beyond his aristocratic bearing. He was a gifted pianist and an accomplished jockey who quickly became the center of Jennie's emotional world. The affair, scandalous though it was, unfolded under the most delicate veil of discretion, at least initially. Randolph, surprisingly, enjoyed Kinsky's company and seemed to suspect nothing. Kinsky even became godfather to Jennie's sister Leonie's second son, further embedding himself into the fabric of their lives. Winston and Jack, Jennie's young sons, regarded the Count as a surrogate father. Yet, even at his tender age, Winston's perceptiveness betrayed the cracks in Jennie's carefully constructed facade. He later recalled the moment he first suspected his mother's affairs. Observing her stockings as she left the house one morning, he noted a blemish on her left stocking just above the shoe. When she returned hours later, that same imperfection had inexplicably shifted to her right stocking, a subtle but damning detail that Winston's sharp young mind could not ignore. Amid these personal intrigues, the family's fortunes were dealt a devastating blow. In July 1883, Randolph's father, the 7th Duke of Marlborough, died unexpectedly at the age of 61. His passing left Randolph's elder brother George as the 8th Duke, but the majority of the family wealth was tied up in trust for their mother, the Dowager Duchess. The arrangement infuriated George, who, desperate for funds, began selling off the family's treasured art and heirlooms. The ducal title may have passed to George, but the ensuing financial tensions tore the family apart. The bitter public and private quarrels between Randolph and his brother culminated in a complete estrangement. With Leonard Jerome unable to provide further financial support, Jennie and Randolph were left to rely on the generosity of friends to make ends meet. After the death of the 7th Duke, a long-standing feud between Randolph and the Prince of Wales finally began to thaw. The prince agreed to meet Randolph, marking the first steps toward reconciliation, though it would be another 2 years before he dined at their home. When he finally accepted their invitation in 1886, Jennie's magnetism once again proved irresistible. The prince, captivated by her wit and elegance, focused much of his attention on her throughout the evening, a dynamic that did not go unnoticed by London society. Meanwhile, Randolph's burgeoning political career took him increasingly away from Jennie as he traveled the country to solidify his position within the Conservative Party. The strain of his absence did not escape notice, with whispers about their marriage spreading through the corridors of power. Joseph Chamberlain, a political rival, made a barbed remark in Parliament. "I do not know what the domestic habits of the noble lord are, but I confess I'm inclined to augur badly of him if he thinks it a matter of suspicion for a gentleman to stop at home with his family." Amid these challenges, Winston's suffering at St. George's School finally reached a breaking point. Removed from the abusive environment, he was placed in a new school, a move that offered him some respite. Yet Winston's admiration for his father remained undimmed. Randolph's departure on a fact-finding mission to India in 1885, a journey meant to elevate his political standing and reinforce British imperial governance, filled young Winston with pride. Ever enterprising, Winston even asked his father for autographs to sell to his schoolmates, showcasing a budding entrepreneurial spirit. Randolph's return from India was brief. Almost immediately, he departed for France, where he spent 3 months recuperating. When he returned in June 1885, he was appointed Secretary of State for India, a prestigious role that required him to defend his parliamentary seat. However, it was Jennie, not Randolph, who led the campaign. With her characteristic energy and charm, she drove through the boroughs, visiting even the most remote areas to court voters. Though societal norms barred her from making speeches, her presence alone captivated crowds. Her beauty and charisma made headlines, and her efforts paid off, securing Randolph's re-election. When the results were announced, Jennie stood before a jubilant crowd, accepting their cheers as they sang "Rule Britannia," a rare moment of public triumph for a woman whose contributions were often overshadowed by her husband's ambitions. The Tory government's victory soon catapulted Randolph into the role of Chancellor of the Exchequer. The appointment, however, came at a steep cost. The immense pressures of the office exacerbated his already fragile health. Friends remarked that he appeared like a man who had suffered a stroke, his sharp wit and eloquence one day giving way to irrational outbursts the next. The Spectator labeled him politically unstable, while Lord Derby dismissed him as more or less mad. Even Jennie, accustomed to Randolph's mercurial nature, was alarmed. He looked as if he'd aged a decade in a year, she confided to a friend. In March 1886, the family faced a harrowing crisis when Winston, aged 11, nearly succumbed to pneumonia. Both parents rushed to his bedside, setting aside their differences in a shared moment of anguish. Though Winston recovered, his health remained precarious, compounded by a speech defect that worried both his parents. As Randolph grew colder and more distant, Jennie began to suspect the influence of another woman. At first, she confided her misery to her sisters, and even her mother-in-law, the Dowager Duchess, who advised her to focus on her duties and distance herself from her more scandalous social circle. Yet Jennie felt increasingly abandoned. Rumors began to swirl about an affair between Randolph and Constance Gladys de Grey, Countess de Grey, a celebrated socialite known for her intelligence and charm. Jennie's jealousy and pain were compounded by her inability to confront Randolph directly, as his declining health began to overshadow every aspect of their lives. What Jennie did not yet realize was that Randolph's erratic behavior was not entirely fueled by infidelity, but by a far graver issue, a debilitating illness that would soon alter the course of their lives forever. By December 23, 1886, Randolph Churchill's political career imploded in dramatic fashion. In a bid for greater power and influence, he made the catastrophic decision to resign from the government after losing a crucial vote on a spending bill. The move, intended as a show of strength, backfired spectacularly. Jennie learned of her husband's resignation not from him, but through the morning newspapers. As she confronted Randolph, he greeted her with a sardonic smile, saying, For Jennie, the resignation was nothing short of a betrayal. All she had worked for, all her father's money that had been spent on furthering Randolph's ambitions, and he could not even bother to tell her. The party now viewed him as unstable, and in many respects, this had been his political death warrant. The weeks that followed were bleak. Randolph, sullen and irritable, rarely left the house. He spent his days lying on the couch, chain-smoking, and barely speaking to Jennie. Their once dynamic partnership had devolved into silence and simmering tension. Whispers of divorce began to ripple through society, fueled by rumors of Jennie's affair with Count Charles Kinsky. The press latched onto the scandal, harassing Jennie relentlessly. Even in New York, headlines proclaimed a Churchill divorce as imminent, forcing Randolph to threaten libel suits in a futile attempt to quell the speculation. The scandal placed her in an agonizing position. A divorce, though rare and ruinous in 1886, seemed increasingly inevitable. Yet such a step would come at an unbearable cost. Divorce would mean exile from the very society that had once adored her, along with financial instability, as women in Jennie's position had few legal protections. For context, only 708 divorces had been granted in the UK that year. In a desperate attempt to quell the rumors, Jennie and Randolph made a carefully staged appearance together at the Savoy. The public ovation they received offered a brief reprieve, but it did little to heal the growing chasm between them. She knew maintaining the facade of unity was vital for her children's reputations. She agonized over what would happen to Winston and Jack if the marriage were to come to an end. Ironically, Randolph's resignation had centered on his staunch opposition to increased government spending on armaments, a move he believed the nation could ill afford. History, however, would deal a cruel twist. 13 years later, the very ships Randolph had opposed were instrumental in the Battle of Omdurman, a decisive moment in British imperial history. Among the soldiers at that battle was none other than Winston Churchill, Randolph and Jennie's son, whose courage and charisma would launch him toward the greatness his father had so desperately sought. Jennie was now a fixture in the gossip columns, where every man she encountered was transformed into a rumored lover. Society has invented a new sport for Lady R, one scandal rag sneered. Husband hunting and fiancé fishing, she has earned the title Lady Jane Snatcher. Yet Jennie refused to bow under the weight of such rumors. She immersed herself in the glittering world of concerts, recitals, and her work with the Primrose League, carefully curating her image as an indispensable social force. Beneath the surface, her letters told a different story, one of a woman deeply attuned to Randolph's fragility and fiercely protective of his dwindling reputation. "It is a blessing to think you are well and happy," she wrote tenderly during one of his frequent absences. "I trust you utterly and don't care tuppence what people say." By 1887, Jennie's life had grown increasingly complex. The couple's finances, once propped up by her father, Leonard Jerome, were now in tatters. Leonard, who had once been a financial titan, found himself struggling, unable to provide the support his daughters had come to rely on. Seeking solace, Jennie threw herself into the celebrations of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, indulging young Winston's wish to join her for the grand spectacle. Amid the parades and balls, Jennie's friendship with the Prince of Wales, her close confidant, continued to flourish. The prince was utterly captivated by Jennie's wit and charm, and their rumored affair had reportedly begun shortly after Randolph was welcomed back into royal favor. During this jubilant year, Jennie's humor was on full display as she pretended to wear a bustle that played "God Save the Queen" every time she sat down. The prince, unaware of the servant hidden under her chair with a music box, was reduced to hysterics, a memory he delighted in retelling for years. But the glitter of Jubilee celebrations could not disguise the family's deep financial strain. By 1889, Jennie's time and energy were consumed by her ailing father. Leonard, his health failing, left Manhattan for England, eventually settling in Brighton in the hope that the fresh air might offer some relief. Jennie visited him frequently, watching helplessly as the man she had adored slowly faded. On March 3, 1891, Leonard Jerome passed away, surrounded by his wife and daughters. The man who had once commanded millions was buried in Greenwood Cemetery in New York, leaving behind not only debts, but a devoted widow who spent her final years tirelessly settling them, ensuring no stain on his legacy. Later that year, Randolph embarked on a tour to South Africa, ostensibly to scout opportunities for British emigration, but truly to seek a fortune in gold mining. From afar, Jennie maintained their correspondence, her letters a lifeline of encouragement and carefully measured optimism. "You will recover," she wrote, "and make a triumphant return to politics, silencing all your critics." Despite their estrangement, Jennie's loyalty to Randolph remained steadfast. By the summer of 1891, Jennie's relationship with Count Kinsky reached its zenith. Kinsky became a near father figure to her sons, taking Winston to the Crystal Palace and growing so close to Jack that his portrait adorned the boy's room. But their love, doomed by societal constraints, was not to last. Pressured by his family to marry within his class, Kinsky had no choice but to distance himself. Heartbroken but pragmatic, Jennie found solace in the attentions of Lord Frederick Wolverton. Though immensely wealthy and devoted, Wolverton could never evoke the same passion in Jennie as Kinsky had, but his presence offered her a much-needed reprieve. Meanwhile, Randolph's decline became impossible to ignore. His trembling hands, slurred speech, and erratic moods shocked even his closest friends. His letters, once fiery and eloquent, were now filled with confusion. "By the way," he wrote Jennie, "when is Jack's birthday? And did I send Winston his monthly check?" Jennie's heartbreak was palpable, but she bore it with characteristic grace, shielding Randolph from further humiliation while consoling their son Winston, who was finally admitted to Sandhurst. By 1893, Jennie confronted the full truth of Randolph's illness, likely syphilis, though modern historians debate whether a brain tumor may have been to blame. Randolph, his pride shattered and his health deteriorating, clung to the idea of a final adventure. When he proposed a world tour as a last act of defiance, Jennie reluctantly agreed. Together they set sail, embarking on a journey that was meant to span 15 countries. Their luggage included not only the grand attire befitting Jennie's status, but also a lead-lined coffin, a grim acknowledgement of Randolph's precarious condition. It was a desperate bid for adventure and dignity, one final chapter in a marriage defined by ambition, scandal, and resilience. For Jennie, it was another act of loyalty to a man whose legacy would owe as much to her strength as to his own. As Jennie and Randolph embarked on their world tour in the spring of 1894, the cracks in their lives became impossible to ignore. Randolph's health was deteriorating rapidly, his speech slurred, his body numb, and his temper unpredictable. Jennie, under tremendous strain, confided in her sister, "I hate it. I shall return without a friend in the world." The journey became a grim reminder of how far they had drifted. What had once been a partnership of ambition and promise now teetered on the brink of despair, leaving Jennie staring into the abyss of her future. Randolph pressed on, refusing to acknowledge the severity of his condition. Letters home to his mother were filled with optimism, as though sheer force of will could restore him. "I feel better every day," he wrote. "I have every hope of returning to England in June well." Jennie, watching him suffer yet unable to breach his denial, carried the emotional and physical weight of the journey. In Rangoon, her burden deepened. She received a telegram from Count Kinsky, her closest confidant and romantic anchor, announcing his engagement to another woman. His parents, fearful that he might marry Jennie after Randolph's death, had seized the opportunity of her absence to press him into a match. Jennie was devastated, writing to her sister Leonie in desperation, "Do you think it is too late to stop it? Please urge him to delay until I have seen him. If I am given the chance, I will redeem all the past." But her plea was futile. Kinsky, bound by family duty, was lost to her. Shortly after, she learned that Lord Frederick Wolverton, another admirer, had also married. The twin blows left Jennie reeling, her romantic hopes shattered. Yet even in her despair, she remained by Randolph's side, offering care and companionship as he steadily declined. Each day brought more visible signs of his illness, his paralysis worsening, his speech faltering, and yet he continued to insist he was improving. By now, even Winston understood the gravity of his father's condition. The young man, now 20, and showing a budding maturity, wrote letters to Jennie, urging her to remain strong. "You are the strongest woman I know," he reassured her. Jennie, strengthened by Winston's words, began to accept the truth. "Charles deserves a good wife, young and pretty, without a past, who can give him children and make him happy," she wrote of Kinsky. "I wish him every joy." The Churchills limped home by Christmas, returning to live with Randolph's mother at Grosvenor Square. The Dowager Duchess, once so critical of Jennie, softened in admiration of her daughter-in-law's devotion throughout the tour. Yet for Jennie, the weight of grief and exhaustion was unrelenting. Why had things gone so wrong? She wailed to her sister. In January 1895, Randolph's decline became unbearable. He could barely speak, eat, or move, and morphine offered his only relief. The family gathered at his bedside for their farewells. He managed a faint smile for Winston and Jack and spoke haltingly to Jennie, who scarcely left his side despite her own exhaustion and neuralgia. On January 24, 1895, Randolph died quietly at the age of 45. Jennie was dazed, her grief compounded by the enormity of what lay ahead. Her sisters helped with letters and telegrams, as old friends came to pay their respects. The Thames froze over that winter, and snow fell on the day of Randolph's funeral. Among the mourners was the Prince of Wales, who wrote to Jennie afterward, praising her courage and offering his heartfelt sympathies. Randolph left Jennie £500 and the income from his estates to their sons. The capital for Winston and Jack amounted to £75,000, thanks to Randolph's South African investments, but debts of £66,000 to the Rothschild Bank weighed heavily on his legacy. Jennie now faced life on a restricted income, relying partly on rental payments from her father's New York property. In March, seeking solace and renewal, Jennie traveled to Paris. At 41, she met William Burke Cochran, a U.S. congressman and renowned orator, also recovering from personal tragedy. The two formed a tempestuous bond, becoming lovers that year. Jennie found herself invigorated by their fiery relationship. "Burke wears me out," she admitted, while Cochran confessed, "She exhausts me." Their passionate quarrels and reconciliations seemed to breathe new life into Jennie, who returned to England feeling revived. Cochran, deeply impressed by Jennie, expressed interest in meeting Winston, a meeting that would leave a lasting impact on the young man. Yet grief continued to shadow Jennie's life. In April 1895, her mother Clara Jerome fell ill and passed away. Though Jennie had always been closer to her father, the loss of Clara marked the end of an era. Her sisters arranged for Clara's body to be returned to America for burial, next to Leonard and Camille, the child they had lost. Amidst the loss and upheaval, Jennie and Winston grew closer. From this moment onward, Jennie would become Winston's most steadfast supporter, channeling her relentless energy and formidable network to propel him toward greatness. For his part, Winston would grow to become her anchor. Their relationship, forged in the crucible of shared trials, became a source of strength for both mother and son. Together, they formed a bond that transcended the ordinary, rooted in resilience, ambition, and a shared understanding that destiny still had great things in store for them. As Jennie reflected on her life after Randolph's death, she confided to her sister with characteristic candor, "If I had to live my life over, I would still marry Randolph and do everything the same." For all the heartbreak, scandal, and sacrifice, Jennie never wavered in her belief that her choices, flawed though they might have been, had shaped a life of purpose and consequence. Now her focus shifted entirely to her sons, especially Winston, whose future she championed with a zeal that mirrored her own ambitions. In September 1895, Winston departed for South America, marking a pivotal step in his budding military career. Ever the strategist, Jennie paved the way, sending introductions to William Burke Cochran, the brilliant American orator who had deeply impressed her during her time in Paris. Cochran welcomed Winston with open arms, hosting him at his Fifth Avenue apartment and engaging him in wide-ranging discussions on economics, liberty, and even yacht racing. Winston, awestruck, wrote to his mother, "He is one of the most interesting and charming people I have ever met," detailing their conversations and the intellectual stimulation Cochran provided. For Winston, Cochran became not just a mentor, but a father figure. He taught Winston the art of oratory, how to pace a speech, land a phrase, and inspire an audience. The bond between them was transformative, and Cochran's influence on Winston's political philosophy would endure for the rest of his life. "I owe you a great deal for all you have done," Winston wrote his mother, "but what I crave most is your applause." Back in England, Jennie was brimming with pride as Winston published his first account of Cuba. But her maternal pride was matched by relentless pragmatism. In July 1896, she lobbied tirelessly for Winston's transfer to South Africa, appealing directly to Field Marshal Lord Wolseley. Winston despised his post in India, believing it would stifle his prospects, and Jennie left no stone unturned in her efforts to fulfill his ambitions. "You have so much power," Winston implored her. "Take no refusal." But Jennie, ever practical, urged her son to excel wherever he was stationed, reminding him that failure was not an option. Jennie's devotion to Winston was not one-sided. Winston, who who had once been a petulant schoolboy, now showed a burgeoning sense of responsibility toward his mother. When he and Jack inherited their coming-of-age fortunes, they both chose to have them to pay off Jennie's debts. For Winston, university was replaced by self-education. Jennie sent him volumes of Aristotle, Gibbon, and Plato to India, where he read voraciously, supplementing his lessons with his father's speeches, which he read over until he knew them by heart. Yet Jennie's life extended far beyond her role as Winston's champion. She continued to dazzle London society, becoming a fixture at events like the Devonshire House Ball, the crowning glory of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897. Dressed as Empress Theodora, the courtesan-turned-empress of Byzantium, Jennie's costume, crafted by Worth in Paris, was a masterpiece. Her presence captivated the crowd. Though now in her 40s, Jennie remained one of the most beautiful women in London, her striking features and lively demeanor drawing admiration from all. Behind the glamour, however, Jennie's financial troubles loomed. That same year, she fell victim to a swindler, James Cruikshank, who persuaded her to invest in a fraudulent scheme, costing her £4,000. "My own affairs are in a dreadful state," she confessed to Winston. "How I wish we were together. I am so proud of all your qualities. You are made of stern stuff." Winston, isolated in India and feeling like a bookish outsider, clung to Jennie's letters for comfort. Her words became the highlight of his week, offering him guidance, encouragement, and the maternal warmth he had long craved. Jennie, in turn, acted as his agent and advisor, securing the publication of his articles in British newspapers. When Winston expressed dissatisfaction with the fees offered, Jennie gently chided him. "Don't haggle. This is just the beginning." Jennie's dedication to Winston's career knew no bounds. When he begged her to help him secure a transfer to Egypt, she even traveled there herself to plead his case directly with the field marshal. Though her efforts were unsuccessful, her willingness to go to such lengths underscored the depth of her love and belief in her son. During this time, Jennie's relationship with the Prince of Wales deepened. Their connection blended affection, flirtation, and mutual fascination. The prince teased her in letters about her rumored lovers, writing with a mix of jealousy and humor. "So tell me about your next victim," he joked, referring to her affair with Hugh Warrender. Jennie, ever unconventional, reveled in his attention. She delighted him with her Japanese dress, commissioned during a trip to Kyoto, and her uninhibited charm, a stark contrast to the more restrained women in his circle. By the end of 1897, Jennie's life was a tapestry of contrasts: financial struggles and social triumphs, maternal devotion and romantic intrigue. Jennie, now unattached, became a magnet for gossip. Every man she encountered was rumored to be a suitor, and newspapers speculated wildly about her future. One scandal sheet even reported an engagement to William Waldorf Astor. While Jennie admitted to a brief affair with the reserved millionaire, she declined his proposal, calling him too staid. Winston, meanwhile, returned to England briefly, where his speeches electrified audiences and earned him immediate acclaim as a gifted orator. Jennie, ever his tireless champion, maneuvered relentlessly behind the scenes, securing introductions and lobbying key figures to advance his career. After 2 years of effort, and a minor scandal involving Lord Kitchener's initial refusal, Winston was finally sent to Egypt, joining the 21st Lancers. In Egypt, Winston faced the horrors of war at the Battle of Omdurman, where he experienced his first cavalry charge. "It was the most dangerous 2 minutes I would live to see," he wrote to Jennie, his exhilaration tempered by the grim reality of the aftermath. Deeply disturbed, he condemned the massacre of wounded dervishes as a stain on the victory. Jennie, reading his words, must have felt both pride and sorrow for her son, whose moral compass had begun to shape his destiny. Back in England, Jennie's life was far from quiet. She began a passionate romance with George Cornwallis West, a dashing officer 20 years her junior. Their affair was intoxicating, but fraught with controversy. George, besotted, addressed her as Dear Angel and professed his undying love. "I cannot live without you," he wrote, promising to abandon everything for her. Initially, his family believed Jennie's intelligence and culture would benefit him, but when they realized the extent of the relationship, they were horrified. For them, the idea of their son marrying the infamous Lady Randolph Churchill, already in her 40s and unable to provide an heir, was unthinkable. Even the Prince of Wales intervened, warning George against marrying an older woman. As public gossip about their age difference reached a fever pitch, Jennie, ever pragmatic, recognized the damage their relationship was causing. Heartbroken, she ended the affair, believing it was for George's own good. Seeking purpose beyond the whirl of romance and scandal, Jennie turned to an ambitious new project, the creation of the Anglo-Saxon Review. "I looked at my life," she wrote, "and thought, was all it held endless balls and parties?" She resolved to produce a quarterly magazine of enduring significance. Drawing on her wide circle of influential friends, she secured contributions from luminaries such as Henry James and the Duchess of Devonshire. The first issue, published in June 1899, was praised for its elegance and scope, though critics questioned its lack of focus. Undeterred, Jennie threw herself into the endeavor, determined to leave her mark. That same year, war broke out in South Africa, and Jennie's focus shifted once more. She chaired a committee of prominent American women in London, raising £45,000 to outfit a hospital ship, the Maine. Sailing under the flags of the Union Jack, the Stars and Stripes, and the Red Cross, the ship was a testament to Jennie's determination. She insisted on accompanying the vessel to Cape Town, ostensibly to mediate between American nurses and British officials, though her heart was set on reuniting with her sons and George, all of whom were involved in the conflict. As the Maine prepared to depart, Jennie received devastating news. Winston had been captured by the Boers. For weeks she agonized, her anxiety palpable. Then, as the ship sailed through heavy fog, word came of Winston's daring escape and triumphant return to British lines. Jennie, relieved and elated, carried on, arriving in Cape Town in January 1900. There, she briefly reunited with Winston and Jack before they returned to the front. However, she received word that George had been wounded and already sent home, causing her to fear for his health. Jennie's time aboard the Maine was not without controversy. Critics accused her of overshadowing the nurses and using the ship as a personal venture. Male colleagues bristled at her authority, dismissing her as imperial in attitude. Jennie, unbothered, dismissed them as weak prigs in private letters. She wrote tirelessly on behalf of the injured, oversaw their care, and documented her experiences for the Anglo-Saxon Review. "I felt gratified to do my small part," she reflected, even as she faced harsh scrutiny. By April 1900, Jennie returned to England. George Cornwallis West met her upon arrival, still defying his family's attempts to marry him off to an heiress. Then, with her characteristic defiance of convention, Jennie married George Cornwallis West in the summer of 1900. At 46, she was unapologetic, embracing the scandal and the gossip with the same daring spirit that had always defined her. Jennie's marriage to George Cornwallis West sparked scandal from the outset. At 46, she wed a man 20 years her junior, a decision that provoked derision from all corners. George's family boycotted the wedding, while the press delighted in branding Jennie a cradle snatcher. Even her closest friends questioned her choice, but Jennie met their scorn with her usual unflinching poise. She was, as ever, a woman determined to live on her own terms. Despite her personal upheavals, Jennie's devotion to Winston remained steadfast. In 1900, breaking off her honeymoon, she joined him on the campaign trail in Oldham, where he stood as the Conservative candidate for Parliament. Her magnetic presence and deft social maneuvering galvanized supporters, and on October 1st, Winston, at just 26, was elected to Parliament. It was a triumph Jennie took as much pride in as if it had been her own. The following year brought the end of an era. The death of Queen Victoria in 1901 marked a seismic shift, ushering in the more relaxed and glamorous Edwardian age. For Jennie, this was a new dawn. Her longtime connection to the newly crowned King Edward VII, once a lover and now a loyal friend, elevated her further in society. Edward honored her service during the Boer War, bestowing upon her the Order of the Royal Red Cross and naming her a Lady of Grace of St. John of Jerusalem. These accolades reaffirmed Jennie's status not just as a socialite, but as a woman of substance and action. Winston's career continued to rise, and Jennie remained his fiercest supporter. She organized lecture tours for him in both England and America, drawing on her extensive network to arrange meetings with luminaries like Mark Twain, Theodore Roosevelt, and her dear friend Burke Cochran. As Winston flourished, comparisons to his late father filled the press, a parallel Jennie found deeply satisfying. But while Winston's star ascended, Jennie's marriage to George began to falter. George, initially enchanted by Jennie's vivacity, grew resentful of her unwavering attention to Winston and sought solace in other women. Jennie, though wounded, channeled her energy into her creative pursuits. Her magazine, the Anglo-Saxon Review, ceased publication in 1901 after a dazzling but brief run. Undeterred, Jennie turned to memoir writing, publishing The Reminiscences of Lady Randolph Churchill in 1907. Dedicated to Winston and Jack, the book was a bestseller, praised for its charm but carefully curated to avoid controversy. Jennie's views on women's roles revealed an intriguing contradiction. While she was a woman of immense influence, she was vehemently opposed to the suffragette movement. She dismissed their militant tactics as odious and believed women wielded greater power through charm and diplomacy than through the vote. As president of the North Wales branch of the Anti-Suffrage League, Jennie gave impassioned speeches denouncing women's suffrage, a stance rooted in her patrician outlook. These beliefs, though deeply troubling, were held by many women of her generation. By 1908, both of Jennie's sons married. Jack wed Goonie Birdie, a spirited woman Jennie adored, while Winston fell for Clementine, the daughter of Jennie's old friend Lady Blanche. Though Jennie admired Clementine's intelligence and grace, the two women were never close. Clementine, reserved and serious, found Jennie vain and extravagant, believing her marriage to a much younger man had made her ridiculous. Yet Jennie beamed with pride as both her sons forged lives with strong, capable partners. Jennie's own marriage, however, was crumbling. George's affairs were now an open secret, and the once romantic bond between them had dissolved into resentment. Seeking solace, Jennie turned to playwriting. Her drama, His Borrowed Plumes, premiered in 1909, starring the celebrated actress Mrs. Patrick Campbell, known as Stella. The play, semi-autobiographical in nature, revolved around a writer grappling with her husband's jealousy and infidelity, a plot that eerily mirrored Jennie's life. Though it ran for only 2 weeks, the production drew significant attention, not least because of the affair that blossomed between George and Stella during rehearsals. The humiliation stung, but Jennie bore it with characteristic dignity. In private, she confided to her sisters about her regret over marrying a man so much younger than herself. "Men are all liars from the cradle to the grave. They will never change. I hate them all," she wrote. Letters from her former lover, Count Kinsky, now a prince who had also had an unhappy marriage, reminded Jennie of what might have been. Had Jennie married Kinsky, a friend later remarked, the real loser would have been Winston. Her primary love would have found its outlet elsewhere. Despite the personal turmoil, Jennie remained a force. She continued to host political and literary salons at Salisbury Hall, a home steeped in history and rumored to be haunted by the ghost of Nell Gwynn, the mistress of Charles II. Her 2 sons, the pride of her life, were now both in happy marriages, and she became a grandmother twice over in 1909 as both Jack and Winston became fathers. In May 1910, the death of Edward VII marked the end of an era for Jennie. Though he reigned for only 9 years, his presence had profoundly shaped her adult life. He had been her lover, confidant, and loyal friend, a connection few women in his circle could claim. To Jennie, Edward was a kindred spirit, a man who understood her wit, charm, and enduring ability to captivate. She mourned him deeply, writing to Queen Alexandra, "He was a great king and a lovable man." As the nation grieved, so did Jennie. The London season came to a halt, its dazzling whirl of balls and parties replaced by somber reflection. She paid her respects not only to the Queen but also to Edward's longtime mistress, Alice Keppel, a graceful nod to a shared understanding of his complex affections. Jennie's relationship with George Cornwallis West had by this time unraveled. They lived apart, their once passionate bond eroded by jealousy and the strain of George's financial troubles. Despite her private sorrows, Jennie turned her energy outward, throwing herself into public causes with fervor. She organized a Shakespearean ball to raise funds for a national theater, transforming the Albert Hall into a lush Elizabethan garden. Clad in a sumptuous costume as Olivia from Twelfth Night, Jennie dazzled the crowd, proving she could still command the spotlight. The event was a success, attended by King George V and Queen Mary, now the stewards of a new chapter in British history. At his coronation, she sat in the King's box next to Alice Keppel, which the ever-cruel London society dubbed the King's Loose Box. By 1912, her marriage to George was irreparable. He wrote to her, "If I ever do anything in the world that is worth doing, it will have been because of you." Jennie, ever gracious, replied, "I have loved you devotedly for 12 years, and this love will only die with me." Yet love could not mend what time and circumstance had broken, and in 1913, Jennie filed for divorce. The separation came at a heavy cost. Jennie, already burdened by debts from her lavish lifestyle, now faced financial uncertainty without George's dwindling support. In 1914, he filed for bankruptcy. Owing more than £15,000, the notice in the Times was cut out by Jennie and placed among her papers. However, much darker problems loomed on the horizon, and in 1914, Britain was at war. Her son Winston was now First Lord of the Admiralty, and the war would see his fall, but Jennie, ever resilient, would rise again to even greater heights than before. At 65, she was more than a relic of a gilded age. She was a force. While her contemporaries withdrew, worn down by time, Jennie pressed forward, proving once more that her indomitable spirit could not be confined by convention or circumstance. Her convictions began to shift in the crucible of war. Once an opponent of women's suffrage, she now marveled at the grit and contributions of women across the nation. She campaigned to release male footmen from households to serve in the military and proudly watched as women stepped into roles once deemed impossible. "War will advance the role of women in society," she told a New York Times reporter. "The world will remember what women have done here." Jennie herself became a symbol of this transformation. She edited a book celebrating women's war efforts, raised funds for famine relief in Belgium, and persuaded Paris Singer to open his Versailles-inspired mansion as a hospital. As matron of a London hospital, she organized ambulances, entertained troops with piano recitals, and toured barracks to boost morale. Despite her earlier skepticism, she now called for women to be granted the vote, praising their wartime service as a debt no nation could ignore. Her own heart, however, was never far from Winston's plight. For Jennie, the war's most piercing tragedy was Gallipoli. Winston's vision for the campaign, bold and daring, ended in disaster, leading to his ouster from government. He resigned, joined his regiment at the front, and became Major Churchill. Jennie's faith in him never wavered. "You are destined for greater things," she wrote to him, railing at the government's short-sightedness. Her fury mirrored the indignation she had once aimed at Randolph's detractors, but Winston, ever pragmatic, tempered her passion. "Your tone should be salt, not bitter," he counseled. While air raids rocked London, Jennie remained steadfast. She dined out during Zeppelin attacks, refusing to alter her life. "It would be giving in to the enemy," she declared. Her courage and unflagging belief in Winston won her even Clementine's respect, a woman once critical of her. During the darkest days, Jennie's strength became a beacon for her family. Even in wartime, Jennie found space for love. Montague Porch, 23 years her junior, captured her heart with his devotion and youthful vigor. "He has a future, and I have a past," Jennie quipped. Against all odds, they married in June 1918. London society buzzed with amusement and envy at her vitality. Her sons, initially skeptical, gave their blessing. Winston remarked at the wedding, "I know you will never regret marrying her." Montague never did. As the war ended, Jennie continued to embrace life. She learned to fly, soaring over Kent at 90 miles per hour, and even appeared in a small film role. She visited her 6 grandchildren, attended friends, and remained a steadfast supporter of Winston, who had returned to government. In 1920, she moved to a modest home on Charles Street, the very road where her life with Randolph had begun. The circle felt complete, but fate would not let her exit quietly. During a visit to friends, Jennie slipped and fractured her leg. Complications set in, and gangrene necessitated an amputation. Ever defiant, Jennie refused to let the loss dampen her spirit. "I'm putting my best foot forward," she joked, even as she wrote poignant letters reflecting on her life. "My poor departed leg led me on some very grand walks," she mused. "I am not to be pitied." Just when she was thought to be recovering, an artery burst in her leg, leading to profuse bleeding. Her final words were, "Nurse, I am feeling faint," then falling unconscious. On June 29, 1921, Lady Jennie Churchill died. Winston, embroiled in a government crisis, rushed to her side, arriving at the same time as Jack. Later that day, Winston wrote, "She will never know old age, decrepitude, or loneliness. After all the sunshine and storm of life, she looked very beautiful and splendid." Since this morning, 30 years have fallen from her brow. She was laid to rest beside Randolph, in the shadow of Blenheim Palace, where their journey had begun decades before. The great estate, once the stage for her battles with the formidable Duchess, now stood silent as the sun cast its golden light over the quiet country church. Her grave was adorned with white roses and orchids, symbols of the beauty and grace she carried through every chapter of her life. From a carefree girl riding beside her father through the bustling streets of New York to a poised and magnetic force at the heart of British society, Jennie had lived as few dared to live. She had stood behind Randolph and Winston as they delivered speeches that stirred the nation, and she had commanded attention in her own right, a woman unafraid to rise, fall, and rise again. The choir's hymn rose gently over the assembled mourners, their voices a prayer to the heavens. Winston stepped forward, his face etched with grief and resolve, and cast red roses into her grave, a gesture of devotion to the woman who had shaped his destiny. The sexton dropped the earth, sealing a life that had burned bright with ambition, love, and defiance of convention. Condolences poured in from princes, statesmen, and admirers across the globe, Asquith, Lloyd George, and her confidant Burke Cochrane among them. The press hailed her as the mother of two remarkable sons, the dazzling beauty who had graced an era of kings and queens. Yet, in 1921, few fully grasped the magnitude of Jennie's legacy. To the world, she was the scandalous wife, the eternal enchantress, the indomitable social force. But to Winston, she was the constant star that had guided him through every storm, the unshakable faith that lifted him when others doubted, the light that never dimmed, even in the darkest moments. 30 years later, Winston Churchill would be hailed as Britain's savior, the indomitable leader who steered the nation to victory in its darkest hour. History would remember his speeches, his courage, and his steadfast resolve. But behind that towering figure was Jennie, the woman who nurtured his brilliance, taught him resilience, and shaped the course of history. Few paused to honor the mother who gave him his light, but Winston knew, as he always had, that she was the force behind his greatness. I hope you enjoyed this week's video on Jennie Jerome. Let me know your thoughts on her in the comments and who you would like to see us cover in the future. As a small channel dedicated to celebrating remarkable women throughout history, your support is invaluable. Every like, comment, share, and subscription helps uncover more untold stories of these extraordinary lives. If you're enjoying our content, please consider subscribing, becoming a Patreon member, or joining as a channel member. Your support truly makes a difference. To everyone who's made it to the end of this video, thank you. We now have over 70 biographies of incredible women on the channel, so be sure to explore their stories and let me know your favorites. A special shout out to our amazing patrons: Velocity Girl, ZenLife68, Jillian Barker, Junie Moon, Philip Gallegos, Kingsley Clark, Kapham Chung, Harry Thurston, Karen Craig, Second Soprano 150, Michelle Lynn Neal, Deborah Himes, Bavia Andrea, Joy McQuire, Tracy Walsh, CTS Bathory, Elizabeth, and America Marie. Your support keeps this channel alive, and I'm so grateful to have you on this journey. Congratulations to last week's trivia winner, Goldfish Brain 32, for guessing Elizabeth of Austria, and to this week's winner, Dreaming of the Kingdom, with honorable mention to April Grant. And to everyone still here, stay safe, keep exploring history, and as always, thanks for watching.